David was slowly regaining consciousness. He was wandering through a dark tunnel and couldn't find his way out of it. The man felt that he could stay there lost forever, doomed to eternal wandering and torment. But finally, he saw a light ahead of him. It was a tiny white dot at first, but it got wider and brighter with each step he took. Finally, it became so big that it pushed out all of the darkness, thereby helping David cross over the line of non-existence. First, he started hearing voices. One of them was melodious and pleasant and belonged to a woman. It sounded familiar. The second voice was masculine and sounded somewhat rude, if not irritated. Soon, David identified the female voice as his wife's, Amanda's, and the male voice apparently was the surgeon who performed his surgery. Still unable to open his eyes, David ended up listening in on their strange conversation. "But he can't hear us, can he?" Amanda asked. The man chuckled and said, "No, of course not. Your husband is in a coma now, which is caused by post-op complications." Amanda fell silent for a moment. Then she asked a question that surprised David even more. "Mr. Johnson, what are the chances that my husband will get better? You have to understand, he's a banker, so any issues with his health will need to be addressed in advance." "Well, personally, I think his chances of recovery are pretty high. He's getting the right treatment, and it should give its result eventually. So the way I see it, it's too early to worry about his will." The surgeon hastened to reassure the woman. Silence filled the room for a brief moment, which was interrupted by the beeping sound of the life support machines. Then Amanda lowered her voice, making David strain his ears to hear what she was saying next. "Tell me, doctor, is there a way to make sure that my husband doesn't wake up anytime soon? Or better yet, that he doesn't wake up at all?" If David wasn't so weak, he would have certainly got up from bed just to look into his wife's eyes at that moment. How could she even ask about something so terrible? The banker couldn't see the surgeon's face, but he was sure that it read genuine surprise. But when the doctor tightly closed the door for some reason and lowered his voice before saying, "Oh, why are you asking about it? I took the Hippocratic Oath, in case you forgot. The patient's health is what's most important to me." The surgeon's voice sounded unnatural, and David felt in his heart that he was hesitating. The unfortunate banker couldn't have known that Amanda made inquiries about his attending physician and learned some interesting information about him. The situation was complicated by the fact that, being a gambler, Patrick Johnson had recently lost a large amount of money playing poker. The amount was several times more than what he had earned in a month. Upon learning of such a skeleton in the surgeon's closet, Amanda immediately realized that she could use it to her own advantage. "Mr. Johnson, take my word for it, you won't have to break your oath. Just don't be so good at your job when treating my husband. And if you do that, you'll get a tidy sum as a reward, which would allow you to enjoy Texas Hold'em again. Or do you prefer Omaha?" Amanda asked frankly. David still couldn't open his eyes, but what he heard was enough to make his heart start racing. From the surgeon's reaction, the businessman concluded that the doctor accepted Amanda's proposal, which meant that David needed to open his eyes if he ever wanted to survive. Soon, David heard the sound of the door slamming and realized that the doctor had left, and he was alone in the room with his wife. What if she decided to simply shut off my life support right now? A disturbing thought flashed through the banker's head. Realizing that he couldn't do anything, the man closed his eyes and started waiting for whatever would happen next. Meanwhile, Amanda took out her phone and called someone, and David continued to pretend that he was still in a deep coma. "Hello, honey. You know what? My husband is in a coma, but his surgeon doesn't mind making sure that our rich banker never wakes up from it. I just need to push him a little and pay him off." Amanda said into the phone and laughed. Sweat started dripping down David's forehead, and his lips were trembling treacherously. Why would she do it? Can Amanda really be so evil? All these thoughts were racing through the poor man's head. The answer to his question was obvious, and David immediately realized that his wife was having an affair. Fortunately, Amanda didn't take any action and left the room, having decided to put all the responsibility on the surgeon. Only now was David able to open his eyes and breathe a sigh of relief. Of course, the young banker's exhausted body had no strength at all, but he preferred not to focus on it and was nervously searching for a way out of his predicament. At some point, David got distracted and didn't even notice when a young nurse entered the room. The woman immediately noticed the change in the patient's condition and was about to call his attending physician when the banker raised his head and whispered softly, "Don't, miss. Don't tell anyone, please." The nurse raised her eyebrow in surprise and stepped closer. "They want to kill me. My wife and the attending physician, they're in on it together," David added with a pleading look in his eyes. The nurse was very surprised, but she didn't argue. Instead, she sat down on the edge of David's bed and tried to calm him down. The nurse's name was Rachel Moore, and she had recently started working in the surgical department. The woman lived alone with her mother, who was courageously fighting an awful hereditary disease. With each passing month, her treatment required more and more money, forcing Rachel to be in constant search for an additional source of income, such as night shifts and subbing in for her colleagues per their request. For some inexplicable reason, she immediately believed David. The nurse probably saw the despair frozen in the eyes of the banker and realized that she was the only person the man could turn to with his problem. Moreover, Rachel knew about Patrick Johnson's gambling problem because he always borrowed money from his employees, only to lose it at the poker table yet again. Therefore, having listened to David's incoherent story, the nurse decided not to tell the surgeon that the patient had woken up. Instead, she decided to help the young banker, who found himself in a very difficult situation. Looking at David, Rachel didn't want to believe that someone would be so cruel as to try to kill the man who was already on the brink of death. The banker's first thought was to go to the police. However, he quickly realized that his words wouldn't have any legal force without hard evidence and wouldn't be enough to open a criminal case against his wife. David and Amanda met 3 years ago, when the young banker had already reached the level of success that most people can only dream of. David was smitten with Amanda from the moment they met. She seemed to personify the ideal of femininity and beauty. Their romantic relationship developed so quickly that 6 months later, their friends were sure that they would soon be getting married. Having married the wealthy man, Amanda immediately surrounded herself with expensive things, which turned her into a kind of modern fairy tale princess. Unfortunately, the woman didn't have any real feelings for the banker. Truth be told, the devious young woman only married David for his money. Since David spent most of his time at work, Amanda had all the freedom and money she could have ever wanted. She spent her days shopping and in beauty salons, as well as having dinners at the most expensive restaurants in the city. Having gotten immersed in the world of wealth and vice, Amanda didn't even seem to notice when she started having problems. Her lover on the side turned out to be very resourceful, among other things. It was Brandon who first came up with the idea to get rid of David in some bloodless way. While the couple puzzled over how best to end the banker's life, fate came to their aid and gave them a gift in the form of David's exacerbated stomach ulcer. It all happened so quickly that the young businessman had to call an ambulance right during a business meeting. There was no time to waste, so the doctors had to perform emergency surgery on David right away. It was then that the devious lovers realized that the time had come for them to take action. The only thing that Amanda didn't take into account was that her husband could wake up from his coma earlier than expected, which ended up letting him learn many new things about his wife. First of all, David asked Rachel to make some phone calls, and then to bring him a piece of paper and a pen. At the same time, the young banker persuaded the nurse to inform his wife that he had woken up from his coma. "But you asked to keep it a secret," Rachel said timidly, but when she saw the banker's face, she stopped mid-sentence. David had already planned out every step he needed to take in his situation. Having fulfilled the banker's request, Rachel was so worried that she literally couldn't find a place for herself. What if things don't go the way David expects them to? After all, he deliberately puts himself in danger, the nurse thought, looking anxiously at the door of his room. Soon, Amanda appeared at the hospital and immediately went to see Patrick Johnson. The woman was furious over the fact that the doctor didn't manage to get rid of David before he regained consciousness. "He woke up. Do you hear me? He woke up." Amanda stormed into the surgeon's office. The doctor was so sincerely surprised by this news that the woman immediately realized that he wasn't aware of this fact. Without saying a word, Patrick Johnson put his index finger to his lips and looked at Amanda meaningfully. Then he got up from his chair and walked towards the door. A plan on how to get rid of David immediately formed in the doctor's head. He believed that the young banker was still on the verge of death, but when Patrick and Amanda came into the room and headed for the life support machine, David opened his eyes and looked at his wife and said, "You won't kill. Neither will your lover. I had a will drawn up in favor of the orphanage. That's where all of my money will go if I were to die." Amanda's face turned pale, and she started sweating profusely. She barely managed to pull herself together, and having realized it was all over, exclaimed, "You're a bastard. You knew everything from the beginning and just pretended to be in a coma." Patrick Johnson froze by the life support machine, unable to decide what to do. Then he heard a voice coming from the corner of the room. "Stand still. You're under arrest." Patrick and Amanda turned around and saw David, the head of security, whom Rachel had called on the phone. The man was hiding behind a curtain all this time and filmed everything that was happening in the room. It was only now that Amanda realized that it was all truly over. A minute later, the handcuffs snapped on the woman's wrists, and the police that had just arrived took her to the station. The disgraced surgeon didn't get to escape prosecution either, although technically he didn't do anything wrong yet. Now, Amanda and Brandon are facing trial, while Patrick Johnson will probably lose his license without the right to reinstate it. After the incident with the attempted murder, David started to get better. Rachel helped him a lot throughout his recovery process. She'd been feeling sympathy for the man since the moment she first saw him. Having gone through so much together, the banker and the nurse quickly realized that they made a great team, and that they could achieve much more together than either of them on their own. David got discharged from the hospital about 2 weeks later. Leaving the hospital, the man was accompanied by Rachel, who had become like a guardian angel to him. Looking at the couple, people on the street couldn't help but smile, being sure that they would live a happy life together and would never have to go through anything like that ever again.